Assalamu alaikum. With all the pain and suffering that our people in Gaza are going through, and with a heavy heart, we say that we are seeing hope, and we are seeing hope collectively as a people, because the narrative, as it's called, has changed. And if we talked about this before October 7th, I know that we all agree things probably would have had a bleaker look from a strategic perspective, although things were somewhat stable. But stable for who? People that were under occupation were still under occupation. Refugees are still refugees. People who are in Gaza were under an embargo and a seize of all means of life. So the struggle of the Palestinian people was still ongoing, and therefore now we probably have gotten to a point where we can analyze where we are now, not only in the context of October 7th, but also and more importantly in the context of the struggle for what's principled as haqq, what is right. And that is something that when you look back at Oslo Agreement and the whole political, I guess, dialogue that was going on, or lack of dialogue, there was no really strategic plan. We had no idea where the Palestinian people were going. And that's why really it's important that you look at events and analyze them from a strategic perspective, not only in the context of our understanding, but you have to basically apply them to the principles that we have learned as Muslims from the Quran and from the Seerah. And therefore this khatira is really about connecting the present and future strategies. Sometimes countries have a long-term strategy that it's really hard for people to understand why certain things are done. Unfortunately, the position of the U.S. government now, as an example, the indifference that the administration has towards the Palestinian life in general, as disgusting really as it is. I can't really use any more diplomatic description. For them, they think that this is strategic planning because they're thinking long term. The U.S. goals in the region are known. They care about basically continuing this sort of new form of empire. The old empire used to be about conquering land. The U.S. is a different form of empire. They care about their interests, and therefore they created pretty much watchdogs in the world who protect or try to protect their interests. Their interests mainly are financial, and we as Americans and as humans, not just as Americans, we have to always stand up for the oppressive interests wherever they are. And that's why we have to speak up and try to do something about the form of government that we have here. If it's a government that is taking away or exploiting the rights of another group or people anywhere else in the world, regardless of whether it's the Al-Qadiyya Al-Falastiniya or any other issue. The rush, however, of President Biden to go to Israel and try to show his support and the long-term strategy obviously backfired, because the strategy itself is defective in the sense that in history colonialism has never worked. It has worked short term, of course. People occupy other people, countries occupy other countries, but the occupier eventually crumbles because human spirit is always stronger than material interests, and that's what's really happening in Palestine now. That's why it's really hard to look at October 7th and not think about this change, and that's why it's really hard to talk about one event in a vacuum. You have to talk about what happened before it. When people ask that stupid question of do you condemn this or do you condemn that, our response is do you condemn Nakba? Do you condemn things that happened before October 7th? Because you can't really start with October 7th. And that's why we always have to think about, as Muslims, we have always had the understanding of what the very long term is, which is, look, we as Muslims, we like to go to Jannah. And that is really amazing to really have the strategic planning that goes that far. But we had failed until now, at least in the present or modern history, of understanding what do we have to do as far as our strategic goal in this life. And maybe we have now been taught a lesson by the Muqawama in Gaza that you can combine the long-term goal and that being a strategic goal in of itself, because strategic is about having a strategy, is about planning, and it's different than tactical. You can have a short-term plan, but your long-term plan is a strategy. Any mu'min will tell you, yes, قول سيدنا عمر, for example, قتلاكم في قتلانا في الجنة وقتلاكم في النار, and we always understand the concept of shahada and giving up one's life and everything for the cause. But at the same time, what are we, or what have we done in this life is really important. And the way we plan things and the way we can do a nahd bil ummah, to rise and to do the struggle in the right way is important. And that's why this lecture is somewhat about connecting the present strategy and the future strategy. And there is no better way to start this than to look at an example of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet, and this is something that an interesting example that is found in the book of Waddah Khanfar Rabi' al-Awwal, and it's one of his podcasts, about the Prophet ﷺ on his deathbed was still asking about the army of Usama ibn Zayd ibn Haritha, and his mission to go to Palestine. The Prophet ﷺ was planning this while he was on his deathbed and asking Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, anfidhu ba'tha Usama, make sure it happens. What happened to it? Went back to them later and said, do you know what happened? And he was upset, because they were still trying to stay with him because he was, sick, and they loved him and they wanted to be there for him. Yet he wanted to make sure that something's being done about Palestine and the Masjid al-Aqsa. The Prophet ﷺ always had strategic planning, and he always acted in a way that shows that he had long-term goals. And the example of his long-term goals were also present in his mubadara, him being a pioneer to try to, have control over Palestine, and to do that, attacking at that time was the victorious, army between the two superpowers at the time. The Romans, Byzantine were fighting the Furs, and a few years before that, obviously the Furs won, and we have the Surah al-Rum, غلبت الروم في أدنى الأرض. أدنى الأرض is Palestine, and they specifically say Ariha, Jericho. So that is critical, because it shows that from that point the Prophet was already planning what he needs to do with Palestine. And you would think that when the Romans in Bid'a Sinin, after 9 years, and that happened to be the time that the Prophet ﷺ was going through Sakarat al-Maut, he was on his deathbed, he planned to attack not the Furs, who at that point were weak and already defeated. No, he actually attacked the Romans, and he sent Sayyidina Khalid, and we have Ma'arak al-Yarmouk and Mu'tah, to show you that he understood, if the Quran gives him that significant emphasis on Al-Quds and Masjid al-Aqsa. By the way, until then, the Masjid al-Aqsa was not called the Masjid al-Aqsa. Masjid al-Aqsa is an Islamic term. It was called at that time Bayt al-Maqdis. So the Prophet knew from this surah about Adna al-Ard, and also from his own Isra, Subhan alladhi asra bi'abdihi laylan wal masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa. Allah said al-masjid al-aqsa. So this is the first time that the term al-masjid al-aqsa. Now why is it Aqsa? Because there was already a plan, because al-Aqsa means the farthest. The farthest than what? The Bayt al-Haram. Now we know that Shamal, north of the Masjid al-Bayt al-Haram, is al-Masjid al-Nabawi. And then al-Masjid al-Aqsa is Aqsa min al-Masjid al-Nabawi. So that in of itself is a prophecy. But for the Prophet, it meant that he had to do something about conquering and having that sort of strategic geography between al-Masjid al-Haram and al-Masjid al-Aqsa. I say this for us to know that we cannot just think about events that we live in without having a long-term goal. And the long-term goal that now you see is becoming clear, because a few years ago people were confused with what happened with is the Sultan going to be able to do anything? Is the Oslo going to get us anything as far as the two-state solution? And that was literally the worst thing that happened to the Palestinian people after the Nakba, because we were lost. We had no strategy as to what will give us our rights back. And now all of a sudden it's becoming clearer that this is about principles. It's about حقوق. And this what brings me into the more important part of this khatira, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the larger plan. Now we have obviously to have the strategy, which is what I was talking about, and to do it the way the Prophet ﷺ, who is our uswa, who is our example. But more importantly, we have to always accept that in this paradigm, we can easily justify our even failure, so long as we do what is asked of us, because Allah has the bigger plan for us. And He tells us this. Allah tells us, إِن يَمْسَسْكُمْ قَرْحٌ فَقَدْ مَسَّ الْقَوْمَ قَرْحٌ مِثْلُهُ. If you are pained, the other party in the kuffar have a similar pain. However, Allah tells us, we have at least something that we can ask from Him, and that is the Jannah, while we have nothing to look forward to. And once you accept that, then you go into the second principle, which is, we understand that in this life we are basically living the experience of humanity. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We created humans to live in a form of struggle. But that struggle is what defines people. And that struggle is what makes you go through that experience where you prove that you are a good Muslim or you're not a good Muslim. Allah says, تِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These days are basically controlled by different people. And then He says, لِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. So Allah uses, the tadawul of the ayyam in a way that will test people. So the second principle here is that we understand that this is part of our struggle. Our long-term strategy is there. Okay, we know that our ultimate goal is going to Jannah, inshallah. Now, when you look at what's happening in Gaza, then you can understand that the third principle, which is basically you have to have sabr, you have to have patience, and even when it's at the cost of losing a loved one. And it's of course a lot easier for us to say this than people that are going through it in Gaza, but this is what Allah tells us. So yes, it's easier for us to say it, but they have more thawab than we do, and wallahu a'lam, because they are doing it and living it, and we see live examples. We talk about Ashab al-Ukhdud. We are seeing similar experiences in this life in the 21st century, and it's almost as if we are really living through the ayat of Surah Ashab al-Ukhdud, and basically seeing how some people are steadfast regardless of what happens. We're learning about connecting this present with that strategic goal. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this earth, and obviously it would be probably a lot easier if everybody respected everybody's rights and there was no oppression and no abuse, but that is not the way humans have lived their lives throughout their existence. And that's why sometimes we find it difficult to accept certain things, but we're never going to get to that point where there is a utopia, where there is this eternal justice and everybody loves everybody and everybody respects everybody, because that's not the world that was created for us to be tested. And therefore never despair, never la majal lil yas. You cannot have yes, you cannot despair. You always have to have hope, because life will go on. Life will go on. There was suffering 100 years ago, and 200 years ago, and 1,000 years ago, and 2,000 years ago, and there are shuhada that were ارتقوا 100 years ago, shuhada in the last Nakba, shuhada even before, obviously the Al-Qadiyya Al-Falastini, which tells you that this is part of the suffering of humans, but it's how you live your life that makes the difference. and therefore it's all about al-akhdh bil-asbab and having that strategy of doing what you're supposed to do. So long as you have those principles, you know that الإنسان خلق في كبد, and life is going to have suffering, and الأيام is going to be, تداول بين الناس. You will have people that will control, al-Masjid al-Aqsa other than Muslims at some point, and your job is to continue the struggle. It's your position about standing for the haqq. And that's why we have nothing against Jews as a religion, or the Jewish people, because they're Ahl Kitab. So if we lived during the time of the Holocaust, Muslims would be the first ones, and should be the first ones, to stand up against the Holocaust, even though we are the victims who are going through the Holocaust now, our own Holocaust, the genocide that our people of Gaza are going through. So we have to realize that we have to have the principles defined, and to know that we accept, that we will give, a price to stand up for what's right. But you have to continue working, and you have to have that strategy, not just in the hereafter. And this is the problem that some people fall into, and in fact, I hate to say, they are the ones that cause the ihbat, that the despair, because they have the wrong understanding of our deen and our strategy. They think it's all about salah in the masjid, and about siyam and اثنين وخميس, and jahid bis-sunan, like some I would not even call them shuyukh that made these statements instead of really taking their hats or whatever it is, to respect the muqawami, the resistance. These are the people that just talk, and they, instead of understanding what the akhdh bil asbab means, they really take our ummah in the path of daya and misdirection. So we have to make sure that when we talk about having a strategy, we understand our end goal. The Prophet ﷺ, before he even started working on the Palestine front, he worked on the issue of his existence in the Jazira, Shibh al-Jazira al-Arabiya and al-Hijaz, and he wanted to control, obviously, his own environment, so to speak, Mecca and territory. And he looked at Surah Quraysh, and he understood from there that for him to be able to deal with Quraysh, Allah says in Surah Quraysh, لإيلاف قريش إيلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف. So the Prophet ﷺ understood how important it is for them to have that sort of economic, trade or means of living, and therefore he attacked them with that when he had the embargo against Mecca. And then he understood their sort of focus and concentration on the Ibadat al-Bayt, since they were in control of it, al-Haram al-Makki. He wanted to also attack them in that direction, and that's when he decided to go with 14 of his followers for i'timar في Mecca, and that's when Sulh al-Hudaybiyah happened, and that's when he forced Mecca to recognize him. So he basically demolished their control over the Bayt. So he took that, he understood those ayats, and he applied them. So it's an example again of the Prophet ﷺ, of how he was running the short-term strategy and the long-term strategy. What happens afterwards, that's in the hands of Allah. We ultimately want to stand up for the principles. So if you, again, to summarize, you understand that eventually the most important thing for a mu'min is to make it to the akhirah. And in the akhirah to be, inshallah, in the Jannah. Then right there you understand that your very long-term goal is there. And then you have to start working on the short-term goals. The short-term goals also have strategic planning. You have, where do you want to be? You want to stand up for the principles of justice, for the principles of humanity, for the principles of being a good person, for the principles of having the values that Allah gave you, sabr, al-iman, to be good to one's family, and that's where we have the qiyam. But we understand that we will be tested, and that's why we have to have the sabr. Having that sort of attitude in dealing with events makes it a lot easier to be able to get to that long-term goal. And most importantly is, when you're dealing with strategy, is that you have to do zimam al-mubadara, the initiative, to be a pioneer, akhd bil-asbab, to do planning. If you realize that there is no way to be able to get your rights but resistance, then so be it. But you cannot waver on those values, because that's how you lose sort of focus of where your end game needs to be. And planning also requires al-akhd bil-asbab on its basic level, which the Quran also tells us, أَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ مِنْ قُوَّةٍ. So your job is to prepare, do what you can. Don't worry about whether you can personally get the job done by yourself or not. No, you do your part, and that's what Allah asks us to do. أَعِدُّوا is prepare, and the order that you're dealing with is al-i'dad. It's not about results, as they say. It's about the means, about doing what you're supposed to do. So I hope that we always understand what our sort of strategic thinking as Muslims are, not just as a Jannah and Nar, which is obviously our ultimate sort of strategy. But before that, Allah created us because we will be tested on this earth, and it's all about the islah that we do and the i'mar, and that's the big concept that we can use to understand what is happening around us in the world today, in Gaza, for the qadiyya al-Palestinian in general, and for humanity. And what is happening in Gaza today has really reignited, this conversation. The conversation that we're having right now was reignited, because you will see that there are people that are coming out, to stand up with Palestine, because they feel that they are all of a sudden part of a qadiyya, part of, an issue of justice. And you will see that there are a lot of Jews who are coming out and standing up with the qadiyya, because they see that this is an issue about occupation, and unfortunately it is worse now. It's more about genocide. But the point is that the qadiyya is bringing these values back to the forefront. And subhanAllah, and I will conclude with this. This is an example of how Ard Palestine, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala barak hawlaha. المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله. Now what does it mean that Allah barak حول المسجد الأقصى? This is really what it means. The barakah, the blessings, is tajaddud al-ata, the repetition of giving. And you will see that these are the sort of beautiful concepts and principles that humanity, in its best form, always stands up for. Being just and not, abusing other humans and not taking somebody else's rights, and all these things are being reignited. So that is al-ata that is being yatajaddad now. It's being now reborn, so to speak. And you see that there are countries that are signing up to the cause because they feel that this is a human issue, and ultimately تصديق للآية that it is the al-ard that Allah has blessed, because throughout history, every time that struggle between good and evil, the paradigm of materialism against the paradigm of iman and goodness and justice, that struggle is coming into real life again. And this is where قتلانا will be in the Jannah, or قتلاهم في النار, because we are standing up for the weak, for those that don't have anything. And whether they were Palestinian or they were not, we are ordered by our book to stand up for what's just and what's right. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أن يرنا الحق حقا ويرزقنا اتباعه, to show us what's right and to give us that understanding of the need to follow that, and at the same time يرنا الباطل باطلا, to show us what's not right, ويرزقنا اجتنابه, and to give us the steadfastness to try to avoid it, because sometimes it's tempting to follow it because of greed, because of money. And we see now زعم العرب, because what's going on right now is really not to their advantage. They're standing on the sides. That's when you see al-batil, and you just accept it because of your own masalih, because of your own interests. So أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.